Hello and welcome to the Dark Money Files, in which we tend to shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, with me is Graham Barrow as usual, and in the dying days of 2020, hurrah, we're looking back at that year to dig out some of the news stories that you might not have had time to pay proper attention to. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray, and hello, everybody. I've got to say, I'm not sure that the dying end of 2020 is quite the most appropriate way of describing the end of the year, but let's go with it.
No, little bit tone deaf, perhaps, but there you go. So we've made it in our look back as far as the summer, haven't we? So we just dispensed with June, I think, when we finished last time.
Well, we had, and one of the delights of preparing for this, although it's not scripted, is we obviously have done a bit of research, and I think both of us have dug out some stories that entirely passed us by first time round.
We've found some cracking stuff, haven't we?
We have, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it. Away you go.
Good. So we did talk last time a little bit about Twitter, and you know, I suppose it's a fact of modern life that there is at least a two-tier media now, isn't there? There's the sort of formal news media, whether internet or otherwise, and then there's this vast, amorphous, informal network, which is, you know, the pretty much the Wild West of reporting, right?
Yes, and it brings to life people who call themselves citizen journalists, and I have to say I get a little bit uncomfortable about that, because there are certain standards of journalism, and being a citizen journalist doesn't always meet those standards, I'm afraid.
No, absolutely. Now, I mean, I don't do Twitter, Graham. It makes me too angry. I prefer my voices to be rather more filtered. But you're a keen advocate, aren't you?
I'm a keen advocate of some of it. Occasionally you see stuff on Twitter which is extremely interesting, and sometimes you find it out on Twitter well ahead of other news media. I'm going to be honest, Ray, it makes me angry as well. But actually I don't mind it making me angry to a degree, because I am concerned at not cutting off all voices, even though lots of them I really, really don't like. But I just I try and manage my anger, but also manage who I connect to on Twitter to a degree as well.
Well, you're a better person than I am. I find I can't control mine.
I think that's a lot to do with just being a lot older, and you just get a bit more resigned as you get older, maybe. I don't know.
Well, possibly so. I shall look forward to that, as I do to many other things. One of the pieces of news from July that I didn't have to go off to Twitter to find, fortunately, was about British Airways announcing that it had brought forward the retirement of its 747 fleet. And I must admit, Graham, I disappeared down a bit of a rabbit hole on this.
Did you?
Yeah, it turns out if you Google 747 facts, you'll learn some extraordinarily life-affirming things.
And are there 747 facts, or is it?
Oh, at least.
Excellent.
At least. The 747, the so-called jumbo jet, has been flying commercially since 1970. Its first test flight predates the Apollo 11 moon landing. I don't know if you were aware of that.
I kind of. I know it's been around a long time, and I very clearly remember the Apollo moon landing. Probably slightly more clearly than I remember the test flights of the 747, if I'm being honest.
But it was never designed to last. It was one of the most tentative aircraft launches ever. I mean, for instance, one of the things that is widely known is that it was designed to be convertible easily into a cargo plane. And most people think that was because they were nervous about, you know, people wanting to fly on something so big, but the real reason was that it was believed that it would have a limited lifespan as a passenger plane before supersonic planes became more prevalent and essentially dominated the market, so that converting all of the fleets into cargo aircraft would be a way of getting a slower eventual return on the investment.
Yeah, that was probably about the time they were forecasting we'd all have our personal hoverboards and all sorts of other wonderful things that have never quite come to pass. But the supersonic thing didn't quite work out, did it?
Well, this is something like the 30th year in a row that I'm disappointed not to have received my personal jetpack, Graham.
I just saw us all as eventually being the Jetsons. And
Indeed.
And for the younger members of our audience, go and look it up. I can't be bothered to explain.
Yeah, no, quite. Like the Flintstones, only kind of the opposite sort of thing.
Yeah.
So when they were designing and building the 747, one of the technical challenges that they had to overcome was the fact that their factories weren't big enough. They had to design and build an entirely new factory. They did so in Washington State, and it remains, 50 years later, the largest building still in the world by volume.
Wow.
It's so big that it has its own internal weather systems.
Goodness me.
I know. Isn't it, though? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So I had a lovely time on the internet finding out these and many other amazing facts about the 747.
It's I probably don't know too many amazing facts. I do know obviously it needed a longer runway than most, so not all airports could deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is almost single-handedly responsible for the expansion of Cape Verde, I believe, because at the time that they were flying, that South African Airways wasn't allowed to overfly much of Africa because of apartheid. So they paid for the building in Cape Verde of an airport and runway capable of landing a 747, and of course that had a fairly positive impact on the economy of Cape Verde. So the 747 has made a little contribution to the group of islands in the Atlantic as well.
Amazing, isn't it? Amazing.
It's just extraordinary. And I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed flying on a 747. And one of the I was fortunate enough occasionally to go on the top deck at the on a 747 and sit at the bar and have a drink on the way to. I think it was the Cayman Islands. I'm kind of dropping names now, but it was really quite splendid and a very different experience from your average flight.
Yeah, no, very much so. And in fact, in other ways, it was a very different flight as well. If you were on the lower deck and you were in the very most forward cabin, you were actually further forward than the pilot was, almost uniquely, and got some extraordinary views on takeoff and landing.
Yes, and alternatively, if you were on the top deck, you were clearly behind the pilots because that's where they were. But you look out the window, and my word, you were a long way off the ground.
You would get further off the ground, though, to be fair.
well, true, but it's kind of contextual, isn't it?
Yeah. At 10,000 metres, there's not much in it between the top deck and the bottom deck, to be fair.
No, but landing, you land quicker than you expect to if you're looking out the window, just because you're that much higher off the ground. It's very strange.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So, in more trivial news, in July, there was the announcement of a surprise presidential run by a musical person of some note.
I think he might be one of my son's favourite recording artists, actually, Ray.
Mr. West.
Yes, he is he's George's favourite recording artist, and George actually he has an album. An LP, I can't call it that, can I? Which has a knife sticking up in the middle of a mound and a heart or something I saw. You'll probably know which album that is, I don't.
No, I don't, actually. It's not my sort of thing, Graham.
No.
Now, his first campaign rally in July was a bit of a disaster by most people's reckoning. And according to this chap's wife, who's also apparently quite famous in celebrity watching circles, was the result of a bipolar episode.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not my cup of tea, really. It's not my sort of music, but I kind of feel a bit sorry for him because he's become an object of ridicule in many quarters, and this is clearly somebody who's struggling with their mental health. And yes, we don't always have that audience in which to have those sorts of struggles. But he's had some pretty poor press, and I think he probably does make very good music, not mine sort, but there's often people who make good music aren't the most stable of personalities. So it's just,
Yeah, well, I think he does produce good music, and the reason I say that is that he's got at least one Grammy Award. And I know this because in September he released a video of himself urinating on the Grammy Award in protest at the carryings on at his record company, apparently.
Oh, so not so much taking the pee as
yeah, very good. Now, I mean, the current incumbent of presidential office has raised the bar somewhat on eccentric behaviour by those seeking office.
Right. We're not going down the pee route here, are we? Well,
no, I wasn't.
Good. It was just one story following on the other. I thought, oh, hold on. Where's this going?
Well, one
person's Grammy is another person's. Yeah,
I was going to say that this is extreme behaviour by any standards, and I stand by it on the basis that he himself publicised that video. But no, I take your point, Graham. It's not a million miles from other rumoured behaviour at all, is it?
It's not, and sometimes we have golden moments, and other times we can just move on.
Well, indeed. What else caught your eye in July then?
Well, I tell you what did, and it really passed me by at the time, was the confiscation of the largest ever drugs haul seized, and it was in Salerno in Italy, and it was $1.2 billion worth of a drug called phenethyline.
Wow.
Don't ask me what it does because I don't know, but apparently it was manufactured by ISIL or ISIS or Daesh or whatever it is you want to call them in Syria. So I thought, wow. That's any other time that would have been pretty headline news, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So what was it doing there?
I think it was en route to being distributed across the world. So it was 400 or so metric tons, I believe, of tablets. I mean, this is not hiding it in a corner in the hold, is it?
And the thing that I always wonder about when you see these stories is how they value illegal drugs, and they often talk about a quantity of drugs having a street value of a certain amount, and I always wonder, well, how is that derived? Is that the value that the dealer gets from their network? Is it what the manufacturers clear? Is it what individual dealers get from their clients? How is that calculated?
I suppose it's. I mean, my guess is it's based on what we once upon a time would have called the recommended retail price. I don't think retail price maintenance works in the drug trade, but I suppose street value is what you would normally expect the end user to pay, although that will be nothing like the amount that actually is received by the people who manufacture it in the first place.
No, because actually, the thing that is surprising is that those people involved in the manufacture and the extraction at the other end of this chain don't see anything like the smallest fraction of that, and often work in very poor and underprivileged environments, don't they?
I mean, you're absolutely right, and you make a really good point, which is that we now look at that drugs haul as a $1.2 billion drugs haul, but because it never was, because it never got sold. So the actual money involved in that is, as you say, a fraction of that. But nevertheless, it would have been a very significant contributor to the illegal funds flowing through the system had it not been seized.
Very much so, but those funds were nothing like $1.2 billion, to be clear.
No, absolutely right. But the other thing is, well, how many others didn't get seized? So then you do worry, Hey, there you go.
That's true. So, are we done with July?
I think so, on that happy note, yeah.
Right, so July and August. Now, this was around the time that we were faced in the UK with the usual summer headlines, few on a scorcher, Britain boils, etc. Yeah. Because we did have a couple of, record hot days, didn't we? But there were other things going on in the wider world.
There were, and some of them quite momentous in their own way,
yeah. So in Beirut, not a country that's had a good few decades, perhaps. The there was a staggering explosion, wasn't there?
It was, and it's one of those that, the story's still coming out now, and who knew that it would eventually resolve to a UK shell company, but, all roads seem to lead there. But the scale of the explosion was just extraordinary, wasn't it, Ray?
Yeah, very much so. Just horrifying pictures. And I can't help thinking that, in a normal year, it would have been a much bigger story and more quickly and thoroughly investigated than it was. As you say, it's only now really that any kind of real insights are coming out. And tell us, Graham, about the involvement of a UK shell company.
Well, this resolves back to a huge pile of ammonium nitrate that had been stored in pretty unstable conditions for about 6 years, that had been offloaded from a boat that was struggling to land anywhere because of its provenance. And believe it or not, in the background of this boat it was owned by, or at least the shipment was being sent by, a company registered here in the UK, which, not surprisingly, for the previous 20 years had filed dormant accounts, as they do. So that story is still coming out. As it happens, I've recorded an interview with Lebanese TV, which I think will be shown early in the new year, and that I've no idea if it'll get any traction here in the UK, but clearly in Lebanon they're still very interested in what happened.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's one to watch, I guess. Also in August, Carmela Harris joined Joe Biden's ticket for the presidential nomination, right?
She did, and that is a much more positive piece of news. It says much about the direction of the kind of flow that a woman of both black and Asian descent has been nominated as VP. It's just fantastic.
It is, but I mean, to an extent, it's a bold move on the basis that this year more than any, the Democrats had to field kind of a conventional establishment known quantity non-wild card ticket, and yet they still went with the first black woman as running mate. Bit of a gamble.
Yeah, although you could be cynical, couldn't you, and say actually what they wanted to do was cover as many bases as possible. So a nice elderly white gentleman to try and get at as much of Trump's base as he could, and a black Asian African woman to make sure that they maintained their standing with a lot of the minorities in the US. So, I mean, you could be quite cynical about it, or you can be quite positive and say no.
Oh yeah, I think whatever the reason, it's a massive step forward and one to be celebrated.
Well, yeah, I mean, you more than me understand some of the complexities of having a marriage which is not a traditional, two white people, because your wife is from Pakistan, and you presumably in your life you've had to deal with some measure of discrimination, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not something we've ever talked about.
Nothing on the scale of Ms. Harris, fortunately.
Well, no, but I mean, my wife's first husband was black. He was from Barbados, and there's a certain kind of low-level background racism or discrimination, which you almost become so used to that it ceases to have any impact. But it shouldn't be there at all, should it? Really?
No, of course not. And until perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, I think I, like pretty much most people, had assumed that the direction of travel here, the ever more progressive nature of society and politics was a one-way street, but we seem to have taken a couple of steps back in recent years.
Well, yeah, clearly 2016 wasn't part of that progressive, incremental approach to the way we deal with things, because clearly with Brexit and Trump, they were two very populist movements that rather bucked the trend, didn't they?
And clearly, my attitude was partly to blame. We took our eye off the ball. We got too complacent. We allowed things to emerge that should never have been allowed to emerge again.
Yeah, and I suppose 60 odd million people have voted now twice for Trump, and clearly millions voted for Brexit, and I think we'd probably do a disservice to try and label all those as nutters, racists, and what have you, because there is clearly an underlying resentment that hasn't been addressed, that's allowed people to feel that way. You don't get 15 or 16 million nutters and racists turn up to vote, because I don't know that many nutters and racists. So lots of people, for whatever reason, were motivated to vote the way they did, and it's a shame that the political discourse now doesn't allow better understanding of that.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's just too polarised.
It is. So do you want to shift the focus to something which is, I know that you and I are both fascinated by and completely missed us first time round, and that's the Backyard Worlds project.
Oh yeah, no, this is amazing.
Go on, tell us about it.
It's about brown dwarfs, Graham.
Yeah, and we're not talking Disney cartoons here, are we?
We're not. Brown dwarfs are fascinating celestial objects. They're kind of halfway between a massive gas giant planet like Jupiter, although probably rather bigger than Jupiter, and a star, which Jupiter would have been if it had been, several times its current size.
Yeah, it's that kind of mass, gravity relationship that allows it to collapse enough to start the nuclear reactions that form our stars, and they're not quite there, are they, brown dwarfs?
No, so it's kind of too big to be a gas giant planet, too small to be a viable main order star.
Yes, but by their very nature quite hard to detect in the normal course of events, because they're not highly reflective, so difficult to see.
Quite right. So this Backyard Worlds project mapped some 95 of them, right?
It has so far, yes, and it's an ongoing. And in fact, anyone listening can take part in this project, which is, if you're so minded, is actually quite exciting, isn't it?
Indeed so, and there are a number of these projects that you can get involved in now. I mean, the first one I ever remember hearing of must have been about 25 years ago now, when the SETI project, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, let you download a screensaver that would comb the celestial data for signals. You can also, I think, participate in the search for exoplanets as well now as the hunt for brown dwarfs.
Yeah, I think there's also one that you categorise galaxies into spirals and globulars and all sorts. So, but this one is good because it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's effectively, they've just got sequences with two images which alternate backwards and forwards like a flip book. And what you're looking for is for a signal which moves clearly between the two pictures to indicate something that's moving against the background of stars. So it's not, it doesn't require any great technical expertise to participate.
And in fact, it's one of the increasingly small number of things that we can, as humans, hold our own on against the machines.
Well, absolutely. Apparently, human beings are much better at detecting signals than the machines are, because there's a lot of noise. So, where a pair of eyes works better than anything else. And I mean, how amazing would it be to be the person who discovered a brand new celestial object of whatever type it is?
In fact, it's one of those projects that you may soon be participating in without actually meaning to.
Go on.
Well, only that I know that when you tick the box that says I'm not a robot on a website, and they put some challenges in front of you where you have to nominate any of the pictures that contain a zebra crossing, for instance, or a car or a mountain. That's not some meaningless test that they're putting in front of you to check that you're human. You're actually taking part in a distributed computing research assignment.
Yes, and are you like me who then agonises over each picture to say, well, is that supposed to be a set of traffic lights? Is that a parking meter? Is it?
I find I bring far too much diligence to these exercises. Yeah. You're absolutely right. But what it means is that we're helping the computers understand the world.
Well, absolutely, and recognition of objects is one of the things that humans do amazingly well. There's this ability to see if you know what a table is, you can see a completely novel table and recognise it, or be able to conjure up an image from all 360 degrees, which is quite extraordinary when you think about it.
Yes, and according to Plato, this was because we'd had a glimpse before our lives into the heavenly principle of the ideal table.
And who am I to say he was wrong?
Yeah, okay.
Nah, he was wrong.
Yeah, I think he was wrong. But anyway, it's a lovely concept, and is one way of explaining something that I'd struggle to explain in any other way. The way that mentally we can look at very disparate 2D or 3D images and say, yes, that's a thing of this class of object.
Oh, right. It just brings up so many things I would love to talk about. The words are symbols. I mean, we just take for granted that we say the word table and we're able to conjure up an image of a table. That's such an extraordinarily powerful thing to be able to do, to be able to just use symbols as a substitute for the actual objects.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
The symbol of the thing and the thing itself. Quite right.
Yeah.
So, back to August.
Yes. Well, looking at the time, I wonder if we need to move on and talk about September, or we could likely to end up here for an hour.
Probably do, because there's another thing that in September that I could talk about for hours.
I think we should just go for it. I think it's just such an amazing thing. I will open the floor for you to kick it off.
The time, September. The place, Mexico. The find, an extraordinary collection of remains. Among them, a large number of mammoths, horses, and camels.
And it's one of those sentences you just have to read a couple of times, just because you read it, you think, oh yeah, and then you think, oh, hold on, mammoths, camels, Mexico. Well, I didn't know any of that. I mean, what were some of the things that kind of occurred to you when you read that?
Well, I mean, famously, North America used to have native horse species, but these went extinct, long before the modern era, and had to be reintroduced to North America when Europeans started having anything to do with the continent. So I was aware that there were horses in North America in historic times, or prehistoric times, I should say. But mammoths and camels, this was complete news to me. So I set off on another one of these internet odysseys and found out some extraordinary things.
Well, I guess the first thing that occurred to me was that obviously the mammoths in North America, and I presume I think they covered much of the American continent, are now extinct. But because they can't have gone extinct for anything that caused or they can't have gone extinct for human intervention or other interventions that would have caused them to go extinct in Europe, because there was no contact between the two.
No, absolutely.
So this is like a global extinction. I think about between 10 and 20,000 years ago. So, you immediately look to climatic changes, don't you?
Well, you do, but the interesting thing here, when you think about it, is our popular picture of the mammoth. The huge pachyderm covered in fur to deal with cold climates on the tundra. Trudging over permafrost. Well, those conditions didn't pertain in Mexico.
Certainly didn't.
And interestingly, that the mammoth is a creature that had quite a wide variety of species that could thrive in different climates.
Yes, and of course these were mammoth skeletons, and I guess the reason why we think of mammoths as woolly is because we traditionally find mammoths in Siberian permafrost, which are perfectly preserved, and there's something, and there'll be woolly mammoths, and there's something much more appealing about a perfectly preserved mammoth. Actually, funnily enough, today I saw that they've just unearthed a perfectly preserved woolly rhino. Didn't know they existed either.
This is the thing. I always thought that when people talked about woolly mammoths, it was purely, descriptive, and it was just a synonym for mammoth. But clearly, woolly mammoth is a particular type of mammoth, and that had never struck me.
Yeah, and absolutely, and the woolly rhino is a particular type of rhino, and I didn't know they had rhinos in Siberia either. But this one is also apparently got a full set of internal organs and everything. So I guess, and isn't it interesting how, because that is the news story, it then colours your whole perception of what a mammoth is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Until you find that they've dug up 200 mammoth skeletons in Mexico City when they were building a new airport, I think, and 25 camels. And apparently these camels are far closer related to Arabian camels, Bactrians and dromedaries, than they are to the residual camels, the kind of the alpacas and llamas that they still have in South America.
Yeah, extraordinary.
So I interrupted you. You were going to say something, haven't you?
No, it's fine. I think you pretty much covered the ground I was going to.
But I just think it's just brilliant, and one of the nice things about doing this episode, but one of the sadnesses of the year we've lived through, is that some of these extraordinary stories have just completely passed us by. But it's nice that we can bring them now.
Very much so, and I think that's probably a good note to end our look at quarter 3 of the year. Next time we'll cover the final quarter, which is still fresh in the memory.
Well, and potentially a story still to emerge. Who knows? We have a day and a bit to go as we record.
We certainly do. But after that, all bets are off, because there'll be a big celebration for the end of 2020. And I can't be the only person who's looking forward to it.